In this video, I'm going to show you how to get video from your camera into your computer over HDMI for $15 or less. The first step is to buy one of these inexpensive HDMI capture cards. You can find them on either Amazon or AliExpress, depending on how fast you need it. You shouldn't spend any more than about $15. You want to search for HDMI capture USB 3.0. That'll have all these unbranded video cards that you see here, these capture cards. And you'll see some that are more than 20. Here's one that's got an upgraded chipset that's got an HDMI pass-through with an audio in and out. If you don't need that, I would just stick to these simple dongles. And again, you shouldn't have to spend more than about $15 or so. They're all based upon the same macro silicon MS2130 or 2131 chipset. So again, they're all pretty much identical, just in different packaging and form factors. They all do have different versions of firmware though, and each one I've found has different issues. Some won't sync to certain frame rates or certain cameras. Others will take a really long time to sync to any HDMI signal. So to allow you to avoid some of the issues, I've tested a bunch of different cards, and the one I found that's the most stable right now, at least for the firmware that's currently shipping on it, is this PiBox. Again, 60 frames per second, 1080. They all support 4K 30 inputs, but they'll generate a maximum of 1080 60 frame per second output. If you've got more time and you want to save even more money, you can head over to AliExpress and just type in MS2130. That's the name of the chipset. And you'll see some of the exact same cards for half or less than what they sell for on Amazon. It's taken about a week or so for stuff to come over from China and AliExpress to the States, so you don't even have to wait that much longer than you would on Amazon. So if you've got a little more time, you can just buy these. And then just to show you, they're all based upon this chipset from a company called Macro Silicon in China. There's two chipsets. There's a 2109 and then a 2130. The 2109 is the older USB 2.0 chipset. It supports a maximum output of 1080 at 30 Hz. It also only supports MJPEG output for those higher frame rates, meaning that you're going to get a compressed signal coming into the computer, which you don't want because you're also going to then be recompressing it to generate the H.264 or H.265. So you definitely want to go for the 2130 chipset. It's only a few dollars more. And this is a USB 3.0 chipset, which not only supports the 60 frame per second for the 1080, but also supports the YUV encoding for the feed into the computer. That's an uncompressed stream. That way you're not compressing the stream twice. You get an uncompressed stream into the computer, then you'll use a program like OBS to compress that to your final deliverable compressed format, either H.264 or H.265. Here I'll show you how to get OBS quickly set up to record your HDMI video. When you first run OBS after installation, you're going to get presented with this auto configuration wizard. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but just so that we have a common baseline, I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. And you want to go to the sources pane and hit the plus icon. And you want to choose video capture device. You can optionally name your device. I'll call mine HDMI capture. And then you're going to get presented with a list of all the video input devices your system detects. I have just one. It's called USB 3 video. The name you see is going to be different depending on the unique firmware on your actual HDMI card. Some will say Macrovision, the name of the chipset that the card is based on. Some will be tailored to the OEM or packager or whoever designed the package for that specific implementation of the chipset. But you can tell pretty quickly whether or not it's your correct device, because if you have a scene set up and you actually have a live video feed, you'll see that video feed in the preview pane within this properties window. Then you want to scroll down and you can choose device default, which should choose the highest resolution and frame rate, but just so that you know what you're working with, go ahead and change that to custom. And you'll see the preview disappear because now it no longer knows what resolution and frame rates you want. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the 1080. And I'm going to set frames per second. I'm going to leave that to match output frames per second. That way we can change it on the OBS configuration generally rather than specific to just this HDMI card. Now for video format, you're going to possibly get presented with two options, YUI, YUI2, and MJPEG. You want to use YUI because that is the non-compressed output of the card. Some cards are only going to present MJPEG because they don't have the bandwidth or the computation to support the YUI. You definitely want to use YUI because it's uncompressed. MJPEG means you're going to be compressing your feed twice. Everything else you can pretty much leave default. For the audio, sometimes this is going to automatically pick the right card. A lot of times it doesn't. So just to be sure, click the Use Custom Audio Device and then make sure it's set to HDMI capture card. So when you finish that, you'll see you now have the one source for the HDMI capture, and you have all these different audio sources. And we're going to delete a few of these because we only want the HDMI capture. We don't want all these others running because that's the only audio you'll probably want to capture. So then you want to go to settings, which is where we're going to do the rest of our setup. And the first thing you want to do is go to audio, and then here are all those other audio sources that you're seeing in the audio plane. So you want to set that to disabled for the desktop audio, and you want to set the mic auxiliary to disabled. And then if we apply that, if I move this window out of the way, you'll now see that HDMI capture is the only audio track that's available. Now with that set, you want to go ahead and go to video, and this is going to change the overriding video settings independent of your capture device. Now our base resolution is 1080, which is what we want, but you see here it's specified at an output resolution scale of 720p, which we don't want. That means all your videos are actually going to be generated as 720. So you want to immediately change that to 1080. And here you can set your frame rate. So, whether you work with 30 or 60, I'm going to go ahead and just change this to 60 because that's my preference. And then I'll go ahead and apply that. And now that we have that done, now we need to actually set the recording parameters so that we're going to specify how we're going to encode the video coming into the computer from the HDMI card. So for that, you want to go to the Output tab. And by default, it's going to give you a simple set of options. We want to change that immediately to Advanced. And when you do that, you're going to get a tabbed interface for the different types of settings that are configurable. Streaming, we're not going to use. And be careful, a lot of times you'll be here, because these will look identical to the recording settings, and you'll change these and wonder why it's not actually changing your recording settings. That's because the streaming settings are independent of the recording settings. So you want to pick the recording tab, and here you have standard or custom output. We want to go ahead and pick standard because that's going to have all the options we need. So the first thing I'm going to do is change my recording path so I can tell OBS where I want all my files, all my recorded files to be stored. So I'm going to pick a directory I've already set up for that purpose. And then the next setting you want to change is the recording format. So MKV is a pretty robust and modern format, but you're probably more familiar with MP4. So I'm going to go ahead and just change that to MP4 just to keep it simple. Now for video encoder, by default, it's going to use whatever you've configured for your stream encoder, but since we're not configuring streaming, you want to set this yourself. Now, if you have a hardware-based video encoder, it's going to present those options. So I have an NVIDIA video card, so it's going to give me the option to do a hardware-based H.264 encoding, as well as HEVC, which is H.265. If you don't have an encoder for your NVIDIA or ATI or a processor-based like Intel's, you can just choose X264, and that's what I'll choose in case that's all you have. That's a software-based encoder. Now, when you do that, you're going to have some new options open up at the bottom here, and these are the encoder settings. Now, the first option is the rate control. The default is constant bit recording. You also have variable bit rate and then a constant quality, which is variable bit rate, but where you set the quality rather than the bit rate. For simplicity, I'm going to go ahead and just pick CBR. Here you can play and experiment with the different bit rates, but if you're doing 1080, 60, 5000 generally is sufficient. You can even go a little bit lower than that. And if you're using H.265, you can even go lower still. You want to experiment to see which ones affect your quality. It's going to depend on how much motion is in your video and also how much detail there is. So I would just experiment, make sure you pick a quality setting that's where you pretty much don't see the difference, but you also don't inflate the files larger than they need to because you're using a higher bitrate than you need. All these other settings we can leave at default. So now that we have that set, I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. Now we want to go to the audio tab. Most of my HDMI videos I'm kind of just doing for demonstration, and I do a voiceover track, so I record my audio separate. If you do that or you don't want the audio, you can set the bitrate to a lower value, again, so it doesn't take up too much space. OBS doesn't provide a way to not record the audio. It's always going to be included within the track. So again, if you don't care about the audio, you can just pick a really low rate. If you do care about the audio, then you can keep it at 160 or even a higher bit rate if you choose. I'm going to just set mine to 96. I'm going to go ahead and apply that as well. And so I think that'll be all the settings we need to get our video encoded, recorded, and encoded. So I'll go ahead and hit OK. And then I have a scene set up here just with my iPhone running a stopwatch. I'll go ahead and click Start Recording. And you can see here in the bottom right there, it's showing you how much time is recorded, also your CPU utilization. I'm running a 24-core CPU, so the utilization is going to be pretty low. But even on a modest system, you're going to see CPU utilization not too bad with modern software-based 264 encoders. So I've got about 20 seconds encoding, so I'll go ahead and hit Stop Recording. And I'll pull up the folder that I've specified where the recordings are to go. And you can see by default it encodes the file name based upon the date and time of the start of the recording. If I double click that into my my video player, you can see it playing back here, and there's an audio recording since I was recording from my camera in video mode, which has the microphone enabled. So I'll go ahead and pause that. And I'll go ahead and look at the metadata so we can see if the parameters of the encoded video match what we specified for OBS. Here we can see we did do 60 frames per second. The encoding's YUV. The bit rate, which I have to pull here to find, the bit rate is right here, which is right at the 5,000 kilobits per second, which is what we specified. And if we scroll to the audio section, we can see here it's encoded at 96 kilobits per second. So this is the absolute minimum that's required just to get OBS up and running and encoded. Once you've got that, you can do all kinds of neat stuff in OBS. You can play around with it, so you can have your video just be a fraction of your canvas. You can add other media sources, so you can overlay that with other video sources or static images or recorded images played back at the same time you're encoding your recorded image. All kinds of neat stuff, text overlays, lots and lots of options. And you can create different scenes and transitions between them so that one video feed is shown on one scene and you can immediately transition to another. It's the kind of thing you normally see with the streamers when they're switching back and forth between camera angles or between gameplay and the camera themselves. But again, this is just to get you up and running quickly to encode video off of your camera